Snow clung to Clara Bennett's torn coat as three mounted men followed her to the gates of Blackwood Ranch. Her little boy was barely conscious in her arms. When rancher Elias Cole stepped onto the porch, she did not ask for food or shelter. She only looked behind her and whispered, "Don't let them take my son." The lead rider produced a custody order bearing the county judge's seal. Elias studied it once, closed the ranch gate, and noticed the signature belonged to a man who had been dead for 2 years. Snow had nearly erased the road when Clara Bennett reached Blackwood Ranch. Her torn coat was stiff with ice, and her 6-year-old son lay limp against her shoulder. 3 riders followed behind, certain she had nowhere left to run. Elias Cole stepped from the ranch house as Clara struck the gate with a frozen hand. She did not ask for food or shelter. She only held the boy tighter and whispered, "Don't let them take my son." The lead rider, Elias Bennett, raised a custody order bearing the county seal. He called Clara a thief and claimed the child belonged with his father's family. Elias read the paper beneath the porch lamp. The signature belonged to Judge Amos Reed. Elias had carried that judge's coffin 2 winters earlier. He opened the smaller gate for Clara, then shut the heavy ranch gate against the riders. As she passed, a burned ledger page slipped from her coat. The Blackwood brand marked one corner. Beside it was the name of Elias's dead father. Inside the ranch house, Clara refused to sit until Elias had carried Noah close to the kitchen stove. The boy's lips were pale, and his small fingers would not release the wooden horse pressed against his chest. Martha Quinn, the ranch's gray-haired housekeeper, wrapped him in 2 blankets and warmed milk in a blackened saucepan. Only when Noah opened his eyes did Clara allow herself to remove her frozen coat. Her dress beneath it was clean but badly mended. One sleeve had been stitched with thread of 3 different colors. A dark bruise circled her wrist, partly hidden beneath the cuff. Elias noticed it but asked no question. Clara ate slowly, dividing nearly half her stew into Noah's bowl before touching her own portion. Hunger showed in the careful way she scraped every crumb from the bread, yet she never asked for more. She told Elias only what he needed to know. Her husband, Samuel Bennett, had died 3 months earlier when his wagon overturned in a ravine outside Red Creek. Before the earth had settled over his grave, Elias Bennett had taken control of the family house, the livestock, and every dollar Samuel had left behind. He claimed that Clara had no legal right to the property because it belonged to the Bennett bloodline. Then Silas accused her of stealing family documents. The accusation spread through Red Creek faster than the winter fever. The same neighbors who once accepted bread from Clara's kitchen began crossing the street to avoid her. The church women stopped speaking when she entered a room. A merchant refused to sell her flour on credit, though Samuel's family owed him far more than she did. Silas used every rejection as proof that Clara could not support her child. He petitioned for temporary guardianship of Noah, promising the court that the boy would be raised in comfort on the Bennett estate. Clara knew what comfort meant in that house. Noah would become a name on a document and a hand guided toward whatever signature Silas required. She had tried to find legal help. 2 attorneys refused to meet her. A third listened until she mentioned Silas, then returned her money and led her to the door. Silas controlled the livestock contracts, freight wagons, and bank loans that kept half the town alive. Few men were willing to anger him for the sake of a penniless widow. Elias asked whether a court had heard Clara's testimony. It had not. Every order had arrived before she knew a hearing had been scheduled. Every witness willing to speak for her had withdrawn by morning. When she tried to leave Red Creek with Noah, 2 Bennett riders stopped her wagon and dragged her back. The bruise on her wrist came from that night. Clara did not describe what happened after they returned her to the house. She simply lowered her sleeve and said she escaped through the washroom window before dawn. She had taken no money and no jewelry. She carried only clothes for Noah, the wooden horse Samuel had carved, a brass key on a cord around her neck, and a packet her husband had told her to protect if anything happened to him. Elias looked toward the folded coat where the burned ledger page had fallen. Clara did not offer to show him the rest. She explained that Samuel had grown frightened during the final weeks of his life. He began locking his desk and checking the road after dark. On the night before his death, he told her that if Silas ever came for Noah, she must leave Red Creek and find someone named Cole. Samuel never explained why. Clara had not known whether Cole was a man, a family, or a place. Then, hidden inside the packet, she found the Blackwood brand beside the name Jonathan Cole, Elias's father. The room became still. Jonathan Cole had been dead for 4 years. Whatever Samuel had expected him to do was no longer possible. Clara lowered her eyes. She said she had not come to Blackwood Ranch expecting Elias to fight her battle. She would work for every meal and leave when Noah was strong enough to travel. She asked only that Elias give her enough time to reach another county before Silas took her son. From the blankets beside the stove, Noah stirred and looked toward the dark windows. The wind carried the faint sound of a horse moving somewhere beyond the yard. His hand closed around his mother's sleeve. Clara promised him the gate was locked. But when she glanced toward Elias's office, she saw a creditor's notice pinned above his desk. At the bottom was the name Mercer Freight and Livestock Company. It was the same name Samuel had circled 3 times before he died. Clara rose before dawn, after barely 3 hours of sleep. Noah still breathed heavily beneath the quilts, so she moved quietly through the kitchen, folded the blankets, washed the cups, and repaired the torn cuff of his shirt. When Martha found her sweeping the floor, she said guests were not expected to earn breakfast. Clara answered that she was not asking to be treated as a guest. She told Elias she would leave as soon as the road cleared. He looked toward Noah's room and offered her 3 days instead. She could help Martha with meals and laundry, and he would pay her the same wage as any temporary worker. It was not charity. It was work. Clara accepted. At breakfast, one ranch hand complained that Blackwood did not need another mouth to feed while wages were late. Elias calmly reminded him that Clara had begun working before the others reached the table. If she earned her meal, no one would shame her for eating it. Later, Clara carried clean cloths to the barn and noticed a chestnut mare standing apart from the other horses. The animal struck the floor, turned toward her belly, and refused water. Wade Mercer, the ranch manager, blamed the storm. Clara reached into the feed sack. The grain felt damp beneath the surface, and gray mold clung to the kernels at the bottom. The mare was not frightened. She was sick. Wade objected when Clara asked that the shipment be removed. He said the feed had cost too much to waste because of a widow's guess. Elias examined the grain and ordered every sack taken away. Clara stayed with the mare, walking her slowly and keeping her from lying down. By evening, the animal had stopped trembling and accepted clean water. Elias asked where Clara had learned to treat horses. She said her father had owned a small ranch, where she kept the books and worked beside men who believed a daughter should know less than the youngest hired hand. Wade's expression changed when she mentioned bookkeeping. He warned her that Elias's office contained private records. Clara said she had no interest in another man's papers, but Wade's eyes moved toward the pocket holding the burned ledger. That afternoon, Noah woke without fever. Elias returned the wooden horse the boy had dropped near the gate. He had quietly repaired its broken wheel. It was the first time Clara had seen her son look at a man without fear. Near sunset, Wade crossed the kitchen carrying invoices. One sheet slipped beneath the table. Clara picked it up and saw that Blackwood Ranch had been charged for 12 wagons of winter feed. Only 6 had arrived. The price was nearly twice the market rate. Beneath it stood Elias Cole's signature. Clara had watched Elias sign her work agreement that morning. The handwriting was not his. Clara waited until Noah was asleep before carrying the false invoice to Elias's office. She placed it beside the work agreement he had signed that morning and pointed out the difference. The forged name leaned too far to the right. The final letters crowded together, and the ink darkened where the writer had paused to imitate Elias's hand. The delivery number was worse. The same wagon had supposedly reached Blackwood Ranch on 2 separate days, although snow had closed the road. Elias asked how a woman seeking kitchen work had learned to examine signatures and freight records. Clara explained that her father had trusted her with every account on his ranch. She had balanced wages, cattle sales, feed orders, and banknotes before her marriage. The Bennett family later forbade her from touching their ledgers, insisting that numbers belonged to men. Samuel had known better. During the final weeks of his life, he brought damaged records home after dark. Clara helped him compare freight receipts with livestock sales while Noah slept. Samuel believed cattle were being moved through Red Creek under false brands, but he died before they identified everyone involved. Elias asked whether Mercer Freight appeared in those records. Before Clara answered, Wade entered without knocking. He accused her of stealing private papers and warned Elias that desperate people often invented crimes to make themselves useful. Clara calmly said the invoice had fallen beneath the kitchen table. Elias could dismiss her if he believed otherwise. Elias asked Wade why Blackwood had paid for 12 wagon loads when only 6 had arrived. Wade blamed the freight company's poor records and reached for the invoice. Elias covered it with one hand. That night, Clara locked her bedroom door and removed the packet hidden inside her coat. Noah watched as she unfolded the burned ledger page. 3 names remained visible: Bennett Livestock, Mercer Freight, and Cole Ranch. Beside them stood a payment large enough to buy a small herd. Samuel had circled it and written 2 letters in the margin: Svetiona. Below them was the name Jonathan Cole. Elias's father had signed the page weeks before his death. Noah asked why they could not give it to Elias. Clara explained that one damaged page could be dismissed as a forgery. Samuel had hidden the remaining evidence elsewhere, and the brass key around her neck was meant to open it. Showing the page too soon would warn Silas that part of the truth had survived. Samuel had also warned that anyone who discovered the page would come for Noah first. A floorboard creaked beyond the bedroom wall. Clara folded the page and pulled Noah close. The sound did not return. The next morning, Elias did not demand the packet. He only asked whether it placed Noah in danger. Clara said it was the reason Silas needed control of him. Elias finally understood. The custody order had never been about rescuing a child. Noah possessed a legal right Silas could not claim while Clara remained his guardian. That afternoon, Wade rode away without recording the trip in the stable log. Inside his coat was a message for Silas Bennett. Clara still has the page. If you believe Clara is protecting the truth rather than hiding a crime, share your judgment in the comments. Elias's next decision may determine whether that truth survived. Elias did not give Clara the full Blackwood ledger. He brought her 6 months of feed bills, cattle receipts, freight records, and payroll sheets, then placed them on the small table near his office window. Clara understood the boundary. He was giving her enough to investigate, not enough to control the ranch. She began by counting cattle. The sale records claimed Blackwood had sent 412 head to market. The ranch books recorded payment for only 375. 37 cattle had disappeared between the pasture and the bank. Clara checked every freight number against the invoices Wade had approved. Several wagons appeared twice. Others were charged to Blackwood on days when no herd had left the property. Mercer Freight collected the fees, while Bennett Livestock received cattle carrying altered brands. She did not accuse Wade immediately. Instead, she asked Elias to compare the sale marks with the branding log. 3 calves listed as dead had later been sold in Red Creek. 8 steers had left under the Blackwood brand but arrived with an extra cut that made the mark resemble Bennett's. Someone was turning Blackwood cattle into Bennett property. Elias read the figures twice. The missing livestock represented months of wages and enough money to keep the bank from threatening the eastern pasture. Wade dismissed the differences as clerical mistakes. Clara did not argue. She asked for permission to inspect the cattle near the northern fence. Snow covered the lower rails, but Clara noticed one section leaning toward the ravine. The post looked solid from a distance. At the base, several had been cut nearly through and covered with mud. A hard wind or a frightened herd would bring the line down. Wade blamed rot. Clara knelt and showed Elias the fresh blade marks beneath the dirt. If the cattle escaped into the ravine, Blackwood would lose enough animals to justify foreclosure. Elias ordered the men to reinforce the fence. Some ranch hands resented taking instructions from a widow who had been there less than a week. Clara worked beside them, carrying rails and holding posts steady until her palm bled. Near midnight, the storm returned. Wind tore loose an older section of fence. The cattle panicked and pressed toward the northern line. The newly braced posts bent but held. Had Clara remained silent, half the herd might have vanished into the darkness. By morning, no animal was missing. The men who had mocked her avoided her eyes at breakfast. Clara returned to the accounts and found another connection. The moldy feed had been purchased at twice its value through Mercer Freight. Blackwood paid for good grain while receiving spoiled stock that weakened its animals. The ranch was being damaged from both directions. Money vanished from the books while poor supplies and weakened fences made the losses appear natural. Elias asked how long the ranch could survive. Clara calculated the debt, winter sales, and the bank's deadline. If nothing changed, Blackwood would be forced to sell land before spring. The parcel named in the creditor's notice was the eastern pasture. It was also the only place on Elias's map marked with the faded initials SV. Clara unfolded the burned ledger page beside the map. The letters matched. She still did not know what SV meant, but she understood why someone wanted Blackwood to lose that land. Elias gave her a permanent desk and access to the remaining records. From then on, no purchase, shipment, or cattle sale would be approved without two signatures. Wade would no longer control the books alone. Noah found Clara at the desk that evening and asked whether she had saved the ranch. She told him they had only discovered how it was being killed. Outside the office, Wade stood in the unlit hall. By sunrise, the oldest Blackwood ledger had disappeared. After the oldest ledger disappeared, Blackwood Ranch grew quiet. Elias searched the office, barn, and storage rooms, but he did not accuse Clara. The book had vanished because she had come too close to the truth. The next morning, she found coffee beside her desk. It held a little milk and no sugar, exactly as she drank it. Elias had already gone to inspect the eastern pasture. No note had been left. The coffee appeared again the following day. Clara never thanked him aloud. Instead, she repaired the torn shoulder of his winter coat and hung it beside the kitchen door. Elias wore it the next morning without mentioning the new stitches. Their kindness passed between them through small acts neither tried to explain. Noah had begun following Elias to the barn. At first, he remained near the doorway and watched him saddle the horses. He still stepped back whenever a man moved too quickly. Elias never called him closer. He left a small brush on the rail and began grooming Daisy, the gentlest mare on the ranch. After several mornings, Noah crossed the barn by himself and touched the brush to her neck. Elias showed him how to hold his hand flat and let the horse smell him. A week later, he placed Noah in the saddle and led Daisy slowly around the yard. Clara watched from the porch as her son's laughter rose above the fence. It was a sound she had nearly forgotten. That afternoon, Elias cut his palm while repairing the northern gate. Clara brought him into the kitchen, washed away the blood, and wrapped his hand with a clean bandage. She noticed the old scars across his knuckles. He noticed how her fingers trembled whenever he shifted unexpectedly. Elias kept perfectly still. Clara said he did not owe her kindness because she had helped the ranch. He answered that kindness was not a debt. It was a choice a person made while enough goodness remained to choose it. Clara looked away before he could see how deeply the words reached her. That night, rain struck the barn roof and melted the snow into dark streams. Clara had gone to check the chestnut mare when hoofbeats sounded beyond the gate. She froze beside the stall. For one moment, she was back on the road from Red Creek, with Bennett riders behind her and Noah crying against her shoulder. Elias entered but did not touch her. He remained several feet away until the sound faded toward the northern road. He told her that Silas would need lawful papers and truthful answers before anyone crossed the gate. No one would take her simply because they arrived with more men. Clara finally revealed that Samuel believed the stolen cattle, Blackwood's debt, and the eastern pasture were connected. Before his death, he gave her the brass key and told her to find Jonathan Cole. Elias led her to his father's old room. Inside a locked cabinet stood a wooden document box marked with Jonathan's initials. The box was empty. Its lock had not been broken. Someone had opened it with a key. Elias admitted Wade had once been trusted with every room in the house. Clara said she was sorry Jonathan had died, believing the ranch failed because of his mistakes. Elias answered that if Wade and Silas had stolen from him, they had taken more than cattle. They had taken his good name. Later, Elias told Clara why the house had remained silent for so long. His wife had died 7 years earlier during a winter fever. Their unborn child died with her. Elias kept working because labor was easier than returning to empty rooms. Clara did not offer empty promises about healing. She simply stayed beside him until the fire burned low. The next morning, Noah placed his repaired wooden horse on the mantel, saying it should remain somewhere safe. Then he ran outside when Elias called him to see Daisy. Clara watched them cross the yard together and allowed herself to imagine another winter at Blackwood Ranch. The hope frightened her. Near dawn the following day, she woke to an empty bed. Noah was gone. Small footprints crossed the wet yard toward the gate. Tied around one wooden post was a red ribbon bearing the Bennett family mark. Clara ran across the wet yard without shoes, following Noah's footprints toward the gate. Elias reached the fence before her. The boy was not outside. They found him crouched behind the tool shed, clutching the repaired wooden horse. He was cold and frightened, but unharmed. Noah said a man had called his name from beyond the gate and promised to take him back to his father's home. The red Bennett ribbon had been tied where a child could see it. It was not an attempt to take Noah. It was a warning that Silas could reach him. Elias carried the boy into the house while Clara held the ribbon in both hands. She did not cry. Her fear settled into something quieter and harder. Before noon, hoofbeats sounded along the main road. Silas Bennett arrived with 6 riders, a lawyer named Harlan Voss, and the county's temporary sheriff. Wade rode beside them as though he had never worked for Elias at all. Silas held up a new order. This one did not bear the signature of a dead judge. It accused Clara of stealing Bennett property and ordered her to surrender Noah while the court considered permanent guardianship. The lawyer announced the charges loudly enough for the ranch hands and travelers gathering near the road to hear. Clara had taken confidential records, he claimed. She had fled with a child who belonged under the protection of his father's family. Now she was hiding inside Blackwood Ranch and manipulating a desperate rancher. Wade stepped forward as their witness. He said Clara had entered Elias's office without permission, altered invoices, and accused honest men of theft to make herself valuable. According to him, Blackwood was failing because Elias had trusted a stranger over the manager who had served his family for years. The words turned several ranch hands toward Clara. She looked at Elias and said she would go with the sheriff if it kept the bank from punishing him. Elias did not seize her arm or order her to stay. He asked whether she wished to leave with them. Clara looked at Noah, then at Silas. No. Elias moved in front of the gate. He asked the temporary sheriff to read the court, filing date, and case number printed on the order. The man hesitated before obeying. Elias entered the number in the ranch's old legal index. His father had kept copies of every dispute involving Blackwood land. The case number belonged to a cattle trespass claim settled 18 months earlier. It had nothing to do with Clara or Noah. Voss said it was a clerk's mistake. Silas insisted the county seal made the order valid and demanded that Elias open the gate. Elias answered that a seal did not turn false words into law. Silas's calm expression finally broke. He warned that Blackwood's eastern pasture was already under threat of foreclosure. The company holding the debt could demand payment within days. If Elias continued protecting Clara, the ranch would be sold before spring. The threat revealed more than Silas intended. Clara understood that he knew exactly which parcel the bank wanted. She stepped closer to the gate and asked why a Bennett cared so deeply about Blackwood's eastern pasture. Silas ignored her. Wade said the ranch had always been badly managed and would fail with or without Clara. Yet when Elias asked where the oldest ledger had gone, Wade looked toward the lawyer before answering. Noah stood behind Martha on the porch. His face had gone pale. He whispered that Silas had once told Wade the child was the key. Clara heard him. So did Elias. Silas ordered the sheriff to act. The temporary officer reached for the gate latch, but Elias remained still before it. He said no one would cross until the order had been verified by a court clerk and Clara had been allowed to answer the accusation. If Silas had come for trouble, he had found it. If he had come for Clara, he would leave disappointed. For several seconds, no one moved. Then the sound of old wagon wheels came from beyond the gathered riders. A freight wagon stopped at the edge of the crowd. Its driver was thin, gray-bearded, and bent from years on the road. He climbed down slowly and looked straight at Clara. His name was Amos Pike. He said Samuel Bennett had given him a sealed envelope 3 months earlier. Samuel had told him to keep it hidden until Clara stood beside a member of the Cole family. Silas called Amos a drunk and a liar. The old driver ignored him. He reached beneath his coat and held up a weathered envelope bearing 2 names: Samuel Bennett, Jonathan Cole. If Elias had opened the gate, would Clara and Noah ever have received a fair hearing? Share your judgment in the comments, because what waited inside that envelope could either save Blackwood Ranch or destroy the last protection Clara had left. Amos Pike held the weathered envelope above the gate where everyone could see it. Silas demanded that the temporary sheriff seize it as stolen property. Elias calmly asked whether Samuel had given it to Amos willingly and whether anyone had witnessed the exchange. Amos said Samuel met him behind the Red Creek freight station 3 nights before his death. The station clerk had seen them together, and Samuel paid for the delivery with a silver dollar cut deeply across one face. Amos produced the coin. The sheriff examined it and allowed the envelope to be opened before the witnesses. Inside was not the complete deed Clara hoped to find. It contained a list of freight shipments, cattle numbers, and the address of a private deposit box at the Red Creek Bank. Samuel had written that the box could be opened only with the brass key held by Clara Bennett. Everyone looked toward the cord around her neck. Silas claimed Samuel had been confused. Voss said the list proved nothing and demanded Clara's arrest. Elias pointed again to the false case number on the custody order. Until the court verified it, there would be no arrest and no transfer of Noah. The sheriff warned that Elias risked obstruction charges. Elias answered that demanding lawful authority was not obstruction. Clara stepped forward and read the shipment numbers aloud. 3 matched cattle missing from Blackwood. 2 belonged to Sales. Wade had approved without Elias's permission. Amos confirmed that he transported those cattle to a holding pasture owned by Bennett Livestock. Wade moved toward his horse. Elias ordered the stable hands to remove its saddle. Wade was free to leave on foot, but Blackwood's books and company papers would remain until the investigation ended. Elias never drew his gun. He simply stood between Wade and the evidence. Clara examined the list again. One route carried the initials SV, matching the burned ledger page and the eastern pasture map. Amos recognized the mark. Samuel had once asked whether he remembered Silver Vein, the old name of a spring beneath the eastern boundary before the town maps were redrawn. Silas ordered Amos to stop speaking. His reaction revealed more than a denial. Clara now understood that the eastern pasture mattered for something beneath the land. Silas had forged orders, pursued Noah, and helped weaken Blackwood because he needed control of it. Elias proposed opening the deposit box publicly before the sheriff, the bank clerk, and witnesses from both families. No document would be removed in secret. Silas refused and claimed Clara might destroy the evidence before morning. Elias offered to place the key in a sealed pouch held by the sheriff until the bank opened. Clara agreed. By surrendering the key, she removed Silas's strongest excuse for detaining her. As the sheriff sealed it, Voss moved behind the wagon and drew a folded paper from his sleeve. He struck a match against the wheel. Martha saw the flame. Elias stamped it out before the sheet burned beyond one corner. The damaged paper contained the deposit box number. Voss had known where the evidence was hidden before Amos opened the envelope. The crowd fell silent. Silas looked toward his lawyer. Wade looked toward the road. Before they left for Red Creek, Amos warned Clara that the box would reveal more than cattle theft. It would show who legally controlled the water beneath both ranches. And Samuel had said the answer was tied to Noah. The Red Creek Bank opened under the eyes of the temporary sheriff, the clerk, Amos Pike, Elias, Clara, and nearly half the town. Silas stood near the back wall with Wade and Harlan Voss. None of them spoke as the sealed pouch was opened and the brass key returned to Clara. The deposit box had been registered jointly to Samuel Bennett and Jonathan Cole. Clara inserted the key. Inside lay a folded deed, a leather-bound account book, and a sealed letter bearing Samuel's handwriting. The deed came first. It described Silver Vein Spring, an underground water source running beneath the eastern boundary of Blackwood Ranch and the neighboring Bennett land. Decades earlier, the Cole and Bennett families had agreed to share its use. Neither side could sell, block, or transfer the water without the consent of both legal owners. Jonathan Cole had held one right. Samuel Bennett had held the other. After Samuel's death, his share passed directly to his only child, Noah. The bank clerk read the clause twice. Silas's claim to guardianship suddenly made sense. If he controlled Noah, he could sign away the Bennett share of Silver Vein, cut Blackwood off from its water, and force Elias to sell the eastern pasture for almost nothing. Noah had never been the burden Silas claimed. He was the one person standing between Silas and the land. Clara opened the account book next. The entries matched the burned page she had carried through the snow. Payments from Blackwood had been redirected through Mercer Freight. Cattle sold under altered brands were listed as Bennett property. Money from those sales had been used to purchase Blackwood's debt through a company whose true owner was Silas Bennett. The ranch had been robbed, then forced to borrow against the losses created by the thieves. Clara laid the burned page beside the open book. The missing edges fit the surviving entry. The names, dates, amounts, and the mark SV formed one complete record. Wade said the book had been fabricated. Clara turned to the freight pages and pointed out his signature on each shipment. She showed the repeated wagon numbers, the false feed charges, and the cattle marks copied from Blackwood's branding log. Then Amos identified the routes he had driven. The evidence did not depend on one paper or one witness. Every piece supported the next. Silas accused Samuel of forging Jonathan Cole's name. The bank clerk produced the original signature card Jonathan had used when he opened the deposit box. The signature matched the deed and the ledger. Clara finally broke Samuel's seal. The letter was addressed to her. Samuel wrote that he had discovered the scheme after Jonathan's death. Wade had removed records from the Cole house and used Elias's trust to weaken Blackwood from within. Silas arranged the freight contracts, purchased the stolen debt, and planned to seize Silver Vein before the coming drought raised the land's value. Samuel feared his wagon accident would not be an accident. He had placed the deed and ledger in the bank because Clara understood accounts better than any man in his family. He trusted her to recognize the pattern and protect Noah if he did not return. He did not ask her to avenge him. He asked her to make the truth public. Clara's hands trembled as the final lines were read, but her voice remained steady. Samuel had not viewed her as weak, foolish, or useless. He had placed the future of 2 ranches in her care because he believed she could finish what he had begun. Silas moved toward the table. Elias stepped between him and the document. He did not threaten him. He simply said that nothing on the table would leave until every page had been copied and witnessed. The sheriff ordered Silas back. Wade began blaming Voss. Voss claimed Silas had deceived him. Their unity broke the moment the papers gave them no place to hide. The sheriff then opened a smaller envelope found beneath the ledger. Inside was a sworn statement from Jonathan Cole, written shortly before his death. Jonathan recorded that Wade had altered Blackwood's accounts and met secretly with Silas regarding the eastern pasture. He had planned to dismiss Wade and report the fraud, but died before taking action. The statement named them both. For years, Elias had believed his father lost the ranch's money through poor judgment. Now he learned Jonathan had discovered the theft and tried to stop it. Clara had not only saved Blackwood's land, she had returned his father's honor. The sheriff ordered the bank to freeze the company holding Blackwood's debt. He also placed the deed, ledger, letter, and Jonathan's statement into official evidence. Silas still claimed the court would grant him control of Noah. Clara faced him across the table. She explained that the deed did not permit a guardian to sell the child's water rights for personal gain. Any transfer required independent review, the consent of the Cole owner, and proof that the agreement benefited Noah. Even if Silas took her place, Elias could refuse. Even if Elias sold the ranch, the Bennett share would remain Noah's. Silas had built his entire plan on the belief that Clara could not understand the document. That mistake had destroyed him. Outside the bank, the crowd waited for news. Inside, the temporary sheriff removed the false custody order from his pocket and placed it beside the evidence. For the first time since Samuel's death, Clara held Noah's hand without fearing that a stamped piece of paper could take him away. But justice was not complete. The sheriff still had to decide whether the men who had ruled Red Creek through fear would walk out of the building or leave it under arrest. By noon, the evidence had been carried from the bank to the Red Creek Sheriff's office under guard. The deed to Silver Vein, the leather ledger, Samuel's letter, Jonathan Cole's statement, the false custody order, and the damaged paper Harlan Voss had tried to burn were placed across one long table. The temporary sheriff sent for the county clerk, the bank manager, and 2 witnesses from the town council. Silas Bennett demanded privacy. Clara refused. For months, every accusation against her had been whispered behind closed doors, filed without warning, and repeated where she could not answer. If the truth was finally going to be heard, it would be heard before the same town that had called her a thief and an unfit mother. The sheriff opened the doors. People filled the narrow office and gathered outside the windows. Ranch hands stood beside merchants, churchwomen, freight drivers, and neighbors who had once crossed the street to avoid Clara. The county clerk examined the custody order first. The seal was genuine, but it had been taken from an unrelated file. The case number belonged to a settled cattle dispute. No judge had authorized Noah's removal, and no hearing had ever granted Silas temporary guardianship. The order was false. The bank manager then confirmed that the company holding Blackwood's debt belonged to Silas through 2 hidden partnerships. Money from cattle stolen from Elias had passed through Mercer Freight before being used to purchase the very debt threatening the ranch. Wade had robbed Blackwood, weakened its livestock, falsified expenses, and damaged the northern fence. Silas had then presented those manufactured losses as proof that Elias could no longer manage the land. Their plan had been simple. Break the ranch from within. Control Noah. Take Silver Vein. Buy the eastern pasture after Blackwood collapsed. Clara explained each account entry in plain language. She matched the wagon numbers to Amos Pike's freight records, the altered brands to the missing cattle, and the false feed invoices to Wade's signatures. She showed how the repeated charges were not careless mistakes, but a pattern designed to drain the ranch without creating one obvious theft. No one spoke while she worked. The woman Red Creek had dismissed as helpless now understood the conspiracy better than the men who had built it. Wade's confidence failed first. He claimed Silas had ordered every transfer and promised that no one would question the accounts. He said Voss had prepared the papers and arranged for the court seal. Silas immediately accused Wade of acting alone. Voss denied both men until the sheriff placed the burned paper before him. The deposit box number had been written in his hand. Their stories broke apart in front of the town. The sheriff ordered Wade arrested for theft, fraud, destruction of property, and falsifying ranch records. Voss was detained for forging legal documents and attempting to destroy evidence. Silas was placed under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, unlawful interference with guardianship, and his role in stealing Blackwood's cattle and debt. Samuel's death would be reopened for investigation. Silas did not resist when the handcuffs closed, but he turned toward Clara as though he still expected her to lower her eyes. She did not. She asked the sheriff to record that Samuel Bennett had not stolen from his family, abandoned his obligations, or left his ranch in disorder. He had discovered a crime and died trying to protect his son. The statement was entered into the official record. The bank froze Silas's company accounts and suspended the foreclosure against Blackwood Ranch. The stolen cattle that could still be identified were ordered returned. The remaining losses would be reviewed for compensation. Silver Vein's deed was secured in the county archive, with Noah's inheritance protected until adulthood. The sheriff also confirmed that Clara remained her son's sole legal guardian. The crowd outside had grown silent. Several people who once repeated Silas's accusations now avoided Clara's eyes. A church elder stepped forward to apologize for refusing her help after Samuel's funeral. A merchant admitted that he had denied her food because he feared losing Bennett business. Clara accepted no dramatic praise. She said fear explained their silence, but it did not erase the harm it caused. Then she took Noah's hand and walked toward the door. Elias stopped beside her, not in front of her. Before the town, he stated that Blackwood Ranch still stood because Clara had recognized the theft, saved the cattle, protected the evidence, and refused to surrender when powerful men called her worthless. He had closed the gate. She had saved everything behind it. If Clara's patience and courage have earned your respect, share this story, save it for another day, and subscribe for more stories where truth is stronger than power. That evening, Blackwood Ranch received word that its foreclosure had been canceled. Clara should have felt free. Instead, Elias passed her room after midnight and saw the old suitcase open on the bed. Her clothes were already folded inside. 3 weeks after the arrests, the last of the snow began to withdraw from Blackwood Ranch. Water ran in narrow silver lines beneath the fences. The cattle moved toward open grass. The recovered livestock had returned, and the bank's foreclosure notice no longer hung above Elias's desk. Clara remained long enough to finish the work she had begun. She rebuilt the ranch accounts from the surviving records, separated purchasing from payment approval, and required 2 signatures on every cattle sale. No single manager would ever again control enough of Blackwood to destroy it in secret. She also signed a protected water agreement on Noah's behalf. Silver Vein would continue serving both properties, but Noah's inheritance could not be sold, borrowed against, or transferred without independent review. Blackwood Ranch was safe. So Clara packed her suitcase. She had earned enough to rent 2 rooms above the Red Creek Bakery. 3 ranchers had already asked her to manage their accounts. For the first time since Samuel's death, she could support Noah without hiding behind another family's gate. She wanted Elias to understand that clearly. She would not stay because she was frightened of leaving. Before sunrise, Elias found her fastening the suitcase straps. He stood in the doorway without asking her to unpack. He placed 3 things on the table: her full wages, a written recommendation bearing the Blackwood seal, and a contract offering her permanent work as the ranch bookkeeper. The position included fair pay and authority over the financial record. She could accept it while living in town, remain at Blackwood, or refuse it entirely. Elias said the gate would never be closed to keep her inside. Clara looked at the contract. She had expected gratitude. She had not expected a choice. Elias told her the ranch needed her judgment, but that was not the reason he hoped she would stay. Noah did not need a replacement father, and Clara did not need another man deciding where she belonged. He wanted her there because the house no longer felt like a place where life had ended. It felt like a home again. Clara looked toward the kitchen where he had once left coffee beside her work. His repaired coat hung by the door. Noah's wooden horse still rested on the mantel, and her desk stood beneath the office window with the ledgers arranged in careful rows. She had arrived carrying nothing but fear, a child, and a burned page. Now her work was written into every part of the ranch. Noah ran in from the barn before Clara could answer. He had mud on his boots and Daisy's brush in one hand. He asked Elias whether they could begin writing lessons again when the pasture dried. Elias glanced at Clara before replying. Noah waited, then quietly called him Pa. The word settled into the room without ceremony. Elias knelt, straightened the boy's scarf, and said they would ride when his mother gave permission. He did not claim the child. He asked Clara. That was when she knew her answer. Clara removed the suitcase from the bed and placed it beneath the window. She signed the work contract, then told Elias she would stay for the job. After a pause, she added that the job was not the only reason. Elias did not offer a grand promise. He took her hand only after she reached for his. At dawn, they walked together toward the ranch gate. Noah followed on Daisy while the cattle moved across the wet field beyond them. Months earlier, Elias had closed that gate against the men who wanted to take Clara's child, silence her truth, and steal the land beneath her feet. Now he opened it toward the road. Clara was free to leave. She chose to remain. "It became home the day you closed the gate against them," she said. "But it became mine the day you gave me the choice to open it again." Behind them, the Blackwood house caught the first light of morning. For the first time, none of them were searching for shelter. They were already home. Already home. Already home. Already home. Already home.